All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. I think we're going to get started then. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. All participants are muted. So if you have any questions, please use the chat. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the chat. I'm listed as North Dakota State Library. My name is Angie, and I'm the Continuing Education Coordinator here at the State Library. The recording to this webinar will be going out shortly afterwards. It'll either go out sometime this afternoon or tomorrow morning, and I'll also be sending along a copy of the presentation slides. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin Iverson. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Angie. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm the manager of the Census office, which is a nice way of saying in most states, we're the state data center. The state data center is the official source of demographic and socioeconomic information on residents of the state. I've been in the job since 2012, and obviously we're very concerned and very interested as we get moving towards Census 2020. And so I'll just go ahead and get started on that, move to my next slide. Obviously, North Dakota is very interested in having a successful Census 2020, and in large part because we're changing. We're changing as a state. We're growing very rapidly. This decade so far, we're the fourth fastest growing state by percentage, and it's a major change for us. We will roll over the first digit in the state's population from a 6 to a 7. Now that hasn't happened since the census of 1920 for 100 years, and so this is a kind of a monumental event for us, and so we're very interested in this. And so a large part of our growth has happened in the western part of the state, obviously with the Bakken boom that's happened this decade. But not just there, but in Burleigh and Morton County in the central part of the state, and Cass County and Grand Forks County in the eastern parts of the state. The state has a vested interest in the census. Now, each state gains or loses or maintains congressional representation based on the decennial census. That is the first and congressional, or should I say, constitutionally mandated purpose of the census is for the appropriation or for the distribution of seats in the House of Representatives. Now, I fully expect we will still have one position or one seat after the census. But that's the first part. But there are many other things that go with it. For instance, the state legislative boundaries are also all set using the same data and the same basic process as the distribution of seats for the House of Representatives. Federal funds, federal grants formulas are also allocated, and there's a University of George Washington University study that showed of the several major federal programs, $675 billion is allocated for a whole variety of things: education, health, human services. I also added the Institute of Museum and Library Services because I thought that might be of interest to the constituents here in this webinar. Apparently that service also uses the same kind of data as many of the other federal programs do in the distribution of their grants. Census data is used for an entire decade, and we will live with that until the next decade, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. So George Washington University did a great job for every state, and this was using data from the 2015 fiscal year, and they showed what the federal obligations were in each state and what it worked out to be per person. So in 2015, per person counted in the census, $1,910 were distributed in the state of North Dakota. And you can see on the right-hand side of the screen the several grants that were involved, everything from medical assistance, Medicaid, to highway planning, to the SNAP program, to school vouchers, Head Start, low-income heating assistance, and the programs go on. And so the census is really a statistic that permeates a whole series of programs that we really need to pay attention to. and it has an impact on it for a whole decade. Now, we take that $1,910, and I just rounded it off here, $1,900 per person. But because of the fact that we live with this data for a 10-year period of time, it has essentially has an effect of about 10 times that, or it's about $19,000 per person using 2015 dollars. So if we miss a single person over a 10-year period of time, it'll cost us over $19,000. If we miss a housing unit with an average of 2.32 persons per household, over a 10-year period of time, the cost is in excess of $44,000. And if the state's population count is just off 1/10 of 1%, the impact over a 10-year period of time is $15 million. There are other reasons as well. You know, we talked a little bit about the representation in Congress and the legislature, but I think it's important to talk about return on, not just return on tax dollars, but if we want individuals to feel like they're equally represented, they're part of society, it's important that they are that they're counted. We want minorities included in the process. It's important that they're counted in the census. That's the first step in understanding their how significant they are, a representation they have in our political process, not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level as well. The Census Bureau put this slide together, and it shows the likely reasons people are less likely, or the reasons people are less likely to participate in the census. It may be that they're just hard to interview. Language barriers, they don't have literacy skills, they don't have internet. It could be they're hard to locate. And certainly we have individuals who have come in that are minorities or are living in, we believe, living in hidden housing units. I was a while ago at an apartment that was built in the back of a hangar at an airport, and I can virtually assure you that that hangar or that airport is not zone residential. And so those kind of places exist, and we know of housing units, especially in the Bakken, where some store owners or businesses built living quarters in, say, the upper floor of their business, so they could at least put somebody where they when they came in, because there was no housing available to them. It's very important we find a way to count those individuals. Certainly we have individuals who are suspicious of government and have low level of civic activity that just aren't involved, kind of doing their own thing, kind of a libertarian, very much just leave me alone, I'll do my own thing, and I really don't trust the government. I've talked to some of those individuals, and whether they feel that way or not, they're included in the census count. Then we certainly have had highly mobile individuals. We do have some homelessness in the area, and people that are just hard to locate. So, but still, those people are also all included in the census count. What we know from 2010, when we look at the map of communities, we recognize that smaller, more rural, or those areas that are off the beaten path, tended to have lower response rates than those areas closer to urban areas, where they may be more connected, for instance, to government, and so on. And this map doesn't show a couple areas not included in this. You'll notice that the area around Sioux County, or where the three affiliated tribes is located, aren't shown. And that's because those areas were not actually, did not have the opportunity to self-respond in 2010. The Census Bureau went straight to door-to-door enumeration for those areas. And so we really don't have historic counts or percentages for those areas. What we do believe, from what we know, is that if they had, they would probably have had lower response rates. I like to throw this slide up because, especially in some of the western counties, we've had some people say, well, the Census Bureau got the population count wrong in 2010, but I'm sure glad they caught up with the population estimate later on, and I feel a whole lot better about that. What this slide shows is for the age group between 0 and 64 years of age, how the population estimate was calculated in 2015. Now, this is the middle part of the decade. And so the Census Bureau took the previous census and they subtracted the number of deaths, they added the number of births, and then they made adjustments for migration. That's the dark gray that you see up on top. And to show you how important the census was for 2010, almost 90% of the data that was used at the middle part of the decade came from the previous decennial census. And the reason I put this slide up here is to explain that if your community was undercounted in 2010, the census the population estimate did not catch up. You in fact trended low for the entire decade, because so much of the data that was inputted was based on the last decennial census in 2010. So what's going to happen from here on out? Well, I have this slide and it shows what's happened this year and then what happens in 2020. In 2019, this year, and pretty much all these have been completed now, the census has been hiring staff, partnership staff, individuals to go around and educate local complete count committees and really get the process started. The local office was established. This was opened in October of this year. Also, beginning in August of this year, the Census Bureau conducted what's called address canvassing. And address canvassing was a process where they went through to confirm the housing locations of individuals that will receive their census form by mail. Not those that will receive it by post office, dropped off at their door. Those individuals that ordinarily receive mail by post office box, but they confirm the locations where individuals that receive their mail by postal delivery at their residence live. And the last thing that's happened, and this is just finishing up now, is complete count committees are being formed and trained. And there's only a few of those left in the state. In fact, I believe by December 15th, the Census Bureau will suspend training for complete count committees. So what happens this next year? Well, starting in January, the Census Bureau will kick off its awareness phase. And basically, in so many words, this is the point at which they start educating the public that the census is coming. You need to be prepared for this, and this is why it's important. In March, they'll switch to what's called the action phase. And beginning on about March 12th, they will start mailing off forms to households asking them to respond to the decennial census. In fact, up to four forms will be mailed to each household. The second form will actually go, the first form will go to all households. The second one will also follow up. And based on responses, the third and fourth forms will also follow after that. Now, ideally, we would have everybody respond to those forms. But the reality is that doesn't happen. And after we get past April 1st, which is Census Day, the last part of this slide, which shows the May to July timeframe, non-response follow-up. This is when the door-to-door activities will begin or occur. What will happen is, for those households who have not responded to the decennial census form, somebody will go to their door, knock, and seek their census answers. Now, in 2010, about 26% of North Dakota households did not respond to the census, to the initial, at least the initial request to the census. And so somebody had to go door to door. And this really adds significantly to the cost of the census when we don't respond. And so I think it's really kind of a waste. It's unfortunate because we're spending money, tax dollars, counting individuals that we could really be spending these tax dollars on something else other than gathering forms. Also, what will happen is, for those individuals who simply refuse to respond, the Census Bureau will be conducting what's called proxy interviews. In other words, if an individual or a household simply refuses to respond to the census, they will end up going to the neighbor's house or someone who knows that household and gathering the information from them. So how is enumeration taking place? Well, this map, and this is a screenshot of a site at the Census Bureau. For those areas shown in blue, these are individuals that receive their mail on a daily basis at their home of residence. For those areas in blue, they will be mailed their census form, and this is called self-response form. So they'll receive their form at their house by mail and asked to respond. Those areas that are shown in tan are where individuals receive their mail at a post office box. Now, nobody will receive their form in a post office box. They will be, Census Bureau employees are supposed to go door to door and drop those forms off. And it's called update leave because the Census Bureau employee will update the location and leave the form for the householder to fill out. The next is group quarters. Because we have individuals in nursing homes, jails, college dorms, administrators will be contacted and asked to submit electronic electronic rosters of individuals. And the last is military, and that's done by the military services that for that service. Now, the Census Bureau has its own list, hard to count list of respondents, and they're based on kind of two factors. One is the definition of the household or the housing unit, I should say, percent where they have a large number of vacant housing, multifamily housing, large apartment buildings, for instance, where we have a lot of rental units are harder because there's much faster turnover. Where we have a lot of people in a housing unit, more than 1.5 persons per room. And then households where not traditional husband and wife families are also lower responded. Where we have individuals that are not high school graduates, people below the poverty level, individuals on household assistance, public assistance, and people unemployed. Now those all kind of go together, but also individuals who are linguistically isolated. And then last is individuals who moved recently. North Dakota we put together our own list, and this is 7, what we identify as unique populations that we're concerned with. American Indians, because it's a large minority in the state of North Dakota. In 2010, the Census Bureau estimates that 4.9% of American Indians on reservations were not counted. I suspect if we were able to break out that number in North Dakota, it would be a little bit higher. Certainly, we've had a large number of individuals from the Bakken oil region who may feel an affiliation to Texas or Oklahoma, who've come into the state and are spending the majority of their time here. Those individuals need to be counted. We also have a lot of retired snowbirds who may not be in the state on April 1st, and it's important that those individuals be counted. Now, for both federal military and college students, they may be legal residents elsewhere, or they may be alien residents. The way the decennial census is done in the United States, we count all individuals where they spend the majority of their time. And so even if an individual at Minot, who's stationed at Minot Air Force Base, may be a legal resident of Wisconsin, because they're spending their time in North Dakota, the decennial census will count them in North Dakota. We've certainly had a lot of fairly recent immigrants into the state. And the last is our frontier counties. Now, this is not universal, but those areas where we have 6 persons or less per square mile, we find typically we have a lower response rate in past decennial censuses. So we want to include all those in our unique populations. Those areas that we're going to kind of focus on. These are some of the lessons when we glean from other states how they were. Lessons that they learned in 2010: make the census a priority, start early, have an integrated approach, focus on hard to count populations, direct messaging at the grassroots level, and create dynamic outreach tools. So those are the key 6 lessons we took out from other states' after action reports that we thought we should really focus on in 2020, excuse me. The state's approach has kind of been 3-pronged. One is the technical effort. The second is a complete count task force, which is the state level, as well as the local committee efforts. And the last is the targeted marketing And so let me just talk about each of those. And I should mention the state legislature funded $1 million for our effort for this census. The technical effort is really making sure the Census Bureau has the correct residential addresses. They know where everybody lives. We provide data in terms of the construction of new residents. We've also gotten involved in making sure they understand where the political and statistical boundaries are, or working with the Bureau and making sure that we have good statistical boundaries for census tracts and so on. That's the first component. The second is the Complete Count Task Force. Governor Burgum appointed Linda Sahovic from the Association of Counties and Louise Dardis from West Fargo. Louise is a former deputy superintendent of the West Fargo School District to lead the state's effort as co-chairs of the task force. The task force is organized with 6 subcommittees, and I'm happy to say Mary Susie is also, the state librarian, is a member of the task force under the Education and Library subcommittee. And so what this task force is doing is really focusing on state and regional opportunities. We've been assisting the Census Bureau in finding enumerators. That's been difficult. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And we've also been working with the local committees in some of their efforts as well. Essentially what the task force is doing through the subcommittees is we've sought to message through already existing organizations. We're not looking at recreating the wheel when it's messaging to constituents, but to use those already existing communications channels to those individuals to explain how important the census is and ensure messaging goes out to those individuals. We have about 40 complete count committees. Now this slide is from a couple weeks ago. I've just got an update today, and I did get a chance to, I got it about an hour before this presentation. We'll have a couple more committees that are added up in the northeastern corner of the state. But we are very well representative at the local level compared to most other states in terms of complete count committees. And I believe complete count committees are probably the most effective tool in the local area to explain to the local residents how important the census is and why they should respond to those forms when they come to your household. And really what we're looking for them to be is a local trusted voice. We really feel that individuals in the local community are much more effective than somebody further away or a message that comes out of Washington, D.C. And really the purpose is to encourage everybody to be counted in the process. We've also hired Super Studio. Super Studio is a marketing firm in Fargo. And again, we're focusing on those unique populations of the state to make sure that they understand how important their participation in the census is. And so we're having a meeting with them this next week to talk about their strategy that they've come up with, and we've budgeted about $400,000 in ad campaign for this next year. The Census Bureau has a really neat tool called Response Outreach Area Mapper, or ROAM. And using it, you can go into a specific location. You can see what the expected response rate will be. Now, the map uses a whole series of characteristics in order to identify what they expect the response rate will be. They will include the 2010 response rate, the percentage of individuals by race, and what the historic response rate has been, the percentage of individuals by education level, and what we expect the response rate will be. In this particular slide, this shows Burleigh and Morton County, and you can see in darker blue the area, kind of the middle part of Bismarck. And that's a census tract where we're expecting a little bit lower response rate. Well, this area also typically has a little bit lower education levels, a little bit higher poverty rate, and a little bit higher unemployment rate than you would typically find in that area versus the areas that are in the lighter shade a little further from the center of Bismarck. I'd like to hit on this one also. We've tried to do a lot of work helping the Census Bureau find enumerators. Finding individuals who are working in the state to work has been a real challenge for us. This particular map over to your right shows the ratio of resumes to job openings, and anything in yellow shows as of April of this year that there were far more job openings in the vast majority of the state than there were active resumes posted on Job Services website. And the point in selecting this time frame, this is the time frame the Census Bureau needs employees as of April, a year from now. Our employment tends to be cyclic in North Dakota. So I believe this gives us the best representation of what we're going to be looking at in 2020. The other thing, historically, most of this decade, the Census Bureau has actually had to bring in employees from out of state to conduct the current population survey. That's a survey that's done for the Bureau of Labor Statistics that calculates the unemployment rate. During most of this decade, they brought in about a quarter of their employees from out-of-state locations. Now, it's one thing when we're getting information on unemployment rate. It's another thing when we have somebody knocking on somebody's door who hasn't responded to the decennial census and asking them about who lives there and asking them about children and so on. That area concerns me. And so we've tried to work with the Bureau as much as we can to help them in the process. The Census Bureau has identified for us those counties that they're of greatest concern hiring individuals. And they'll tell us the 15 counties that they're finding every 2 weeks that are most difficult. These are not in an order of most difficult, but an alphabetical order that the Bureau has told us. And so I have another map here that shows we've overlaid where we found complete count committees with a report we've gotten from the Bureau as of October 29th and then again November 12th that shows those areas that they're having a difficult time hiring. And I've thrown on top of a map that we have of coverage of complete count committees. And so it shows in those areas, for instance, if you look at Divide County, there is a complete count committee that we can reach out and touch. That's an area that they've had hiring. But if we look over in some of the other counties, such for instance, Still County in the eastern part of the state, we don't have a complete count committee, and they're having difficulty finding individuals. So we really don't have anybody we can reach out and touch and say, hey, can you help us with this problem? So these are concerns of ours, and these are some of the things we've been working on. Now, I did get an email from the federal government yesterday saying they have had some success as of recent, increasing the number of applicants. One of the things they've had to do is increase the wage. In most of the counties in the western part of the state, they've increased the wage from $17.50 to $21 an hour. In the eastern part of the state, most counties are now paying, I believe, $21 an hour, up from $17.50, and Cass County has also gone to $21 an hour. So what role can librarians play for your community in Census 2020? Well, we believe the first thing is support the hiring effort. And I put that up first because it's important we get those enumerators hired. We believe it's very important that local faces be the individuals that are knocking on the doors of the non-respondents or those individuals who refuse to respond to the census. We think that's much, much more effective than somebody coming from far away or certainly from out of state. I should mention also, during an earlier phase called address canvassing, the Census Bureau actually had to bring in out-of-state employees as from as far away as New York in order to complete the work in North Dakota. And that really concerns me. In that previous time frame, those individuals didn't have to talk to anybody, but with much greater numbers of individuals, that are needed for non-response follow-up. That would really be a tragedy, I think, if we had to bring in individuals from New York or someplace like that. We have provided bookmarks to the state librarian to distribute to the state. I believe that 7,500 bookmarks, bookmarkers, what we've provided, and you'll be happy to know we've just put in another order because apparently there's those have gone over really well. So we've asked for the publishing company or printer to publish some more of those. The next thing I really think is educating the public on the importance of the census. Explain the why. Librarians are trusted individuals, one of the most trusted groups that the public has. And this is a flyer that's shown on the right-hand side that we put up. It's actually posted on a website, and it shows the facts for public librarians. Really goes into how the census will be conducted, who should respond, get involved. There's a back page to this also that shows what questions will be asked. People have asked me about the citizenship question. That has been dropped. That question will not be asked in 2020. And then we also, it talks a little bit about the confidentiality of the census. And I think that's another role census that librarians really can play is be the trusted voice on safety and security. Libraries are a place that people can research topics. I've certainly run into those individuals who say, well, I don't want to provide my information because I don't know it's safe. This is a handout that's also posted on our website that shows the history of privacy and confidentiality. And I would really encourage people who question this to do their own research, to find out about what's the history of confidentiality with the census. In order for an individual to work for the Census Bureau, to be an enumerator, they have to subject themselves to the rules of Title 13, which means if they for some reason would share that information that they obtain as an enumerator outside of the Census Bureau, they subject themselves to a $250,000 fine and 5 years in jail. And so that is a really stiff penalty. And on the back page of this, over to your right, it shows the history of Census Bureau data and confidentiality. And if you read through there, you'll find that only in 1942 was an exception made, and it's only in Washington, D.C., 1942, where where data from the census was shared outside the Census Bureau. That's the only time in the last 100 years. And that was only in the area of Washington, D.C., and individuals of Japanese ancestry were shared in response to a threat against President Roosevelt. But that's the history of security. And like I said, I wouldn't challenge individuals to find that. The other reason I think that librarians and particularly can be a trusted voice is the physical location of where the libraries are located. In many cases, we find them in tracts where individuals have lower income. And so just by the individuals that living around the library who have walking access to the library, librarians are available to help educate the public about the safety and security and the need for those individuals to participate in the census. That was all I had, and I'd be glad to take any question as Angie.
We do have one question, and the question is it true that librarians cannot help people answer the questions, just help them log in?
Yeah, my understanding is you can't actually answer the question for them. You can read the question that they're being asked. You can't type the answer for them. They need to answer that themselves. It needs to be their answer, essentially, not your answer.
Follow-up question, or another one is, will a census representative be contacting libraries to ask for our help?
I do know that we've contacted, we did contact through Mary earlier to ask about setting up hiring locations, putting out tables where to help hire employees at for the Census Bureau. And in a number of cases, because the libraries are located in areas where there's a lower, they've had a difficult time hiring individuals, and I thought it would be a new approach to try and reach those individuals. I do not know of any specific program the Bureau would have that specifically deals with librarians, but I can tell you this, that they are very interested in working with complete count committees, and certainly the librarians are part of the community in that. So it's a little bit more of a generic response, I think. They don't have something specifically for librarians, but certainly they have involvement, or want involvement with every community.
Well, I am not seeing any more questions pop up. So I think we can call it good. If anyone has any questions though, Kevin's email is on the slide. And we did get one comment. Thanks for the info. And then I will be sending out a recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for being willing to do the webinar. All right. Thank you for attending, everyone. Have a good afternoon.